chapter 5, verses 1, 2, and 3. Give ear to my words, O Lord. Consider my groaning. Give attention to the sound of my cry, my King and my God, for to you do I pray. O Lord, in the morning you hear my voice. In the morning I prepare a sacrifice for you and watch. Psalm 5 begins, like many of the Psalms, with David crying out to God. He asks God to hear his prayer, to turn his attention to what's going on in his life. And I love that. In verse 2, David refers to God as his king. Now, I cannot say if David wrote this psalm before he became king of Israel or after. But either way, if you think about it, either way, it's a pretty powerful statement. If it's before he became king, then David recognized that the real leader of his life is not King Saul, but it's God himself. And if it's after he became king of Israel, I think it's even more powerful. He's saying that even though I am the highest authority in the land, there is still a God who is over me, above me, and who is really in control of everything, including what happens to me. David, as king, had more power than anyone on earth, but he understood that God is the real king and God is the ultimate authority. He follows that with verse 3, such a powerful verse. David says that God hears him in the morning as he prepares a sacrifice. And the very first thing David does in the morning when he wakes up is to call on God to offer a sacrifice. But then he says something even more important. He says he prepares the sacrifice and he watches. I don't know about you, but I see an eager anticipation in David. He believes that God is going to answer. He believes that God is going to move, and he waits in faith on the Lord. And this idea of waiting in faith on God is one of the most common things that we find throughout all 150 of these Psalms. But here's the thing, who among us likes to wait? I haven't found anyone who says, man, I love being stuck in traffic, or I'm so glad that I chose the longest line at Walmart. No, if you know me, you know I despise waiting. And it shows in how fast I eat, how fast I drive, how aggravated I get when I don't get what I want in the time frame that I want it. Well, you might be better at waiting than I am, because truthfully that wouldn't be very hard. But my guess is you don't like waiting either. And I don't know where this impatience of mine comes from, at least a little bit. I think I have to admit it's a warped and admittedly arrogant belief that my time is somehow more valuable or more important. I don't know if you can relate to that or not. But let's read just a little bit further in this psalm. Psalm chapter 5, verses 4, 5, and 6. For you are not a God who delights in wickedness. Evil may not dwell with you. The boastful shall not stand before your eyes. You hate all evildoers. You destroy those who speak lies. The Lord abhors the bloodthirsty and deceitful man. It is here in Psalm 4, 5, and 6, that we see why David cried out to the Lord in the first place, why he brought that morning sacrifice. He's going to tell us more about his struggles in a few verses, but here we begin to catch what he's experiencing. Those he refers to in these verses are described as wicked, as evil, as boastful, as liars and bloodthirsty men. And so David is waiting on God in the middle of something real, something extremely difficult, not the inconveniences that I often experience that I want out of. He has something real going on. He's in the middle of real trouble, and he sacrifices and waits on the Lord. By the way, listening to these verses makes me believe that David actually wrote these after he became king. Because as a shepherd boy, his enemies probably wouldn't have risen to this level that David mentions here in these verses. I also think it's important to recognize some observations that David makes. Let me just mention 6 of them here for you quickly. Number 1, God does not delight in wickedness. I think this is a super important observation that David makes. God does not delight in wickedness. Evil cannot dwell with God. The boastful will not stand before God. He says God hates the evil that evildoers do. And God destroys those, number 5, who speak lies. And finally, he wraps it up by saying God abhors the bloodthirsty and deceitful person. And those are some really strong words, aren't they? I think it's important to understand that David is not referring to someone who's trying to walk with God and fails. This is not about a person who sins and repents. He's not talking about someone who has hurt his feelings. He's talking about those who have made rebellion against the things of God a way of life. That's who he's talking about. And so David, he wants no part of that. In verses 7 and 8, he's going to speak of the abundant love that he is experiencing in God and his desire to humble himself and be led in the way of righteousness. If the enemy's on the wrong path, David pleads for God to show him the right path so that he's not walking the same one they're walking. He wants that straight path. And I love this about David. He's constantly asking God to put him on the right path, isn't he? His heart's desire is to be close to God and to do what God desires him to do. Is that your desire today? To do what God would have you do? In verse 8, David utters a prayer that you and I would do well to adopt. David says, make your way straight before me. In other words, make your way plain and easy to see so that I can follow it. He's not asking for an easy path. He's asking for a revelation of the will of God so that he can walk the path, whether it's easy or difficult. Let's put this all together. Let's wrap up this psalm by reading verses 9 through 12. For there is no truth in their mouth. Their inmost self is destructive. Their throat is an open grave. They flatter with the tongue. Make them bear their guilt, O God. Let them fall by their own counsels. Because of the abundance of their transgressions, cast them out, for they have rebelled against you. But let all who take refuge in you rejoice. Let them ever sing for joy, and spread your protection over them, that those who love your name may exult in you. For you bless the righteous, O Lord. You cover him with favor as with a shield. Back and forth David goes, talking about himself, talking about his enemies, talking about himself, talking about his enemies. And then finally, at the end, he lumps himself together with those who are faithful. He says, the wicked, you're not going to stand, but the righteous are. Not only will the righteous stand, but the righteous will be joyful. There's this contrast that he makes. The wicked, they are destroyed, and the righteous, they are protected. The actions of the wicked bring God's hatred. The actions of the righteous bring God's favor. And when David says it that way, and you're able to take a step back and look, why would anyone choose the way of wickedness? When we see the consequences laid out in front of us here in Psalm chapter 5. And yet daily, if we're being honest, we struggle to stay on that path that God has laid out in front of us. So my prayer is that you'll take some time right now. Take some time right now to pray that prayer that David prayed. To pray that God would lead you in the path of righteousness. And I pray that you, like David, will eagerly wait in faith on the Lord as you do. That you will anticipate an answer, because our God is a prayer-answering Father. I'm so glad you joined me for Psalm chapter 5. I want to encourage you to head on over to our podcast where we're going to dive deeper into this psalm. We've got a special guest today that we're excited to have in the studio with us. And so head on over there, take a look at that. And I just pray that you have an incredible week. If you're going to be here in Decatur, Alabama, we hope you'll join us at the Beltline Church of Christ on Sunday for our worship service. But wherever you might be, I pray that the Lord will bless you and keep you. Have a great week, and God bless you.